Welcome back to Classic Books Deep Dive, the show where we unearth the hidden gems in those books everybody's heard of, but nobody's really, dug into. I'm Michael, and with me, as always, is...
Joanna.
And today...
Ready to dig.
Today we're tackling a book that's been, let's just say it's sparked a lot of conversations, maybe a few arguments, too. It's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by John Gray.
This one hit the shelves back in '92, and honestly, it's never really left the relationship section. I mean, it really grabbed people with that idea that men and women are so different, like they're from different planets.
Yeah. I remember thinking, that was so clever when I first heard it. It kind of made sense of those times when I was just like, what is happening in my relationships? Like, are we even speaking the same language?
Right.
But gotta say, though, some of it feels a little dated now, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We've learned a lot about gender and relationships since the '90s.
For sure.
But Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus still has some really good insights about why we get tripped up in how we talk to each other, how we deal with stress, like what we actually need to feel loved.
Okay, so let's break this Mars-Venus thing down. What's the big idea Gray's trying to get across?
Basically, it's a call for understanding. Gray's arguing that men and women, we have fundamentally different ways of dealing with our emotions, how we communicate, how we react to stress. And if we don't get that, we're going to end up misunderstanding each other, getting frustrated, fighting.
So it's not about saying one way is right and the other is wrong. It's more about recognizing that we approach things differently.
Yeah, exactly. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. You can try to force it, but
It's not going to work.
it's not going to work.
One of the things I remember most from the book is that men in caves, women as waves analogy. Can you explain that to our listener?
Oh yeah, definitely. This is like Gray's most famous metaphor, and it really shows those core differences. He says that when men are stressed, they tend to retreat into themselves like going into a cave to process their emotions quietly. It's not that they don't care or anything, it's just their way of coping.
Yeah, I've seen that. Sometimes the best thing I can do is just give my partner space to figure things out on his own. If I push him, he just pulls back further.
Exactly. And then women are like waves. We go through more ups and downs emotionally, and we need to talk about our feelings to feel better. It's not about being dramatic or needing attention. It's a real need to process and express those emotions.
That's such a powerful image. It reminds us that instead of judging those emotional waves, we can learn to just ride them with understanding and compassion, maybe even offer a life vest, by just listening and validating those feelings.
Totally. And Gray actually has this great quote about that. To fully understand a woman's feelings is to honor her. It means recognizing that her emotional world is just as valid as yours, even if it's different.
There's another quote that really struck me. It's about that same need for understanding. Men need to remember that women talk about problems to get close, not necessarily to get solutions. Like a light bulb went off when I read that.
Right. It goes against that classic Mars-Venus clash where men jump in to fix things and women just want to connect emotionally.
Okay, so we're starting to see these Mars-Venus dynamics play out. But how do we bridge that gap? How do we actually support each other in a way that respects those differences?
Well, that's where Gray gets into how to give and receive love in a way that works for those Martian and Venusian hearts. He calls it speccing the love language of your partner.
Love languages. I've heard that before. But what does it actually mean in this context?
Basically, Gray's saying men and women experience love and feeling appreciated differently, like different dialects.
So a man might feel most loved when his partner trusts him to handle things, gives him space, tells him how much she admires his strengths.
Exactly. And a woman might feel most loved through, gestures of affection, quality time, deep conversations where she feels really heard.
It's like we're trying to send love signals,
Yeah.
but they're not getting through because we're speaking different languages. No wonder those Martian and Venusian relationships can be so tricky.
Yeah. Gray actually gives specific ways to score points with your partner by speaking their love language. This is where it can feel kind of formulaic, but there's truth to it. It's about being aware of what makes your partner feel truly loved and appreciated.
So instead of assuming we know what they need, we need to really pay attention and learn their individual love language.
Right. Like learning a new language. It takes work, but you can get so much closer. And a big part of that is learning to avoid those communication traps that lead to arguments.
Ah, the arguments. They're like a universal language in relationships, aren't they? No matter for Mars or Venus,
Yeah.
we all find ways to disagree.
Well, Gray says a lot of arguments come from those basic differences in how we communicate. Men often focus on logic and solutions, while women want emotional validation and understanding.
It's that classic thing where a woman's venting about a problem and the guy immediately jumps in to fix it, giving advice she never even asked for.
And then she feels unheard, and he's frustrated that his help isn't appreciated. Total Mars-Venus clash.
But there's a quote from the book that helps explain this. When a man can listen to a woman's feelings without getting angry and frustrated, he gives her the greatest gift he can give her.
It's about creating that safe space for her to express herself without judgment.
And this applies to both partners, right? It's about listening with empathy, even when it's tough, even when we don't totally get where the other person's coming from.
Absolutely. And that's where respecting those Mars-Venus differences comes in. It's about recognizing that our partner might experience and express emotions differently, and that's okay.
So instead of trying to change our partners, we can focus on understanding and accepting those differences. Which reminds me of another great quote. Men are like rubber bands. They need to pull away to come back closer.
Oh, that's a good one. It shows how men need space, that cave time. It's not about rejecting the relationship. It's about recharging so they can come back feeling more connected.
And Gray says women need to feel close to pull away. They need to feel secure and loved, and then they can have their own interests and independence.
It's about that balance between being together and being independent, and knowing that both are important.
We've covered a lot, from love languages to communication to needing space, but there's one more thing that's key to understanding this. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus idea.
And that's the influence of our past experiences, those unresolved hurts and emotional baggage we bring into our relationships. And that's what we're going to get into next time.
Welcome back to Classic Books Deep Dive. We're diving deeper into John Gray's Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
We were talking about how men and women were wired so differently, especially when it comes to stress and talking to each other. Those men in caves, women as waves metaphors really paint a picture.
Yeah, those really stuck with me. But knowing about the differences is one thing. Actually bridging the gap is a whole other story.
Yeah.
How do we actually use this to make our relationships better? How do we support each other's needs?
Well, Gray gets into the nitty-gritty of giving and receiving love in a way that really speaks to those Martian and Venusian hearts. He calls it, get this, speaking the love language of your partner.
Okay, love languages. I've heard of those. But what does that even mean here?
What he means is men and women, we have totally different ways of feeling loved and appreciated. It's not that one's better or anything. It's like different dialects,
So, for instance, a man might feel really loved when his partner shows she trusts him to handle things, gives him space, tells him she admires his strengths.
Exactly. And a woman, she might feel most loved with things like gestures of affection, quality time together, those heart-to-heart talks where she feels truly understood.
It's like we're sending out these love signals, but they're getting lost in translation because we're not speaking the same language. No wonder those Martian and Venusian relationships can be so tricky.
Right. Gray actually has these specific tips on how to score points with your partner by speaking their love language. It can sound a bit formulaic, but the idea is solid. It's all about being mindful of what makes your partner actually feel loved and appreciated.
So instead of just assuming we know what our partner needs, we got to actually pay attention and learn their love language.
Yeah, think of it like learning a new language. Takes effort, takes practice, but it can bring you so much closer. And one of the biggest things is learning to avoid all those communication pitfalls. The ones that lead to arguments and misunderstandings.
Oh, the arguments. They're practically a universal language in relationships,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't matter if we're from Mars or Venus. We all seem to find ways to disagree.
Well, Gray says that a lot of these arguments come from those fundamental differences in how men and women communicate. Men, they're often all about logic and finding solutions, while women, they're looking for that emotional validation and understanding.
It's that classic situation where a woman is venting about something and the guy immediately jumps in to fix it, giving advice that nobody asked for.
Exactly. Then she feels like he isn't listening. He's frustrated that his help isn't appreciated. Talk about a Mars-Venus clash.
There's this quote from the book that really gets to the heart of this. Gray says, when a man can listen to a woman's feelings without getting angry and frustrated, he gives her the greatest gift he can give her.
It's all about creating that safe space for her to just express herself without judgment.
And I think that goes both ways, right? Being able to listen with empathy even when it's hard, even when we don't really understand where the other person is coming from.
Absolutely. And that's where respecting those Mars-Venus differences comes in. Knowing that our partner's way of feeling and expressing emotions might be different from ours, and that's totally okay.
So instead of trying to change them, we can focus on understanding and accepting those differences. Which reminds me of another quote. Men are like rubber bands. They need to pull away to come back closer.
Oh, I love that one. It shows how men need space, that cave time we were talking about. It's not about rejecting the relationship. It's about recharging so they can come back feeling more connected.
And Gray says that women, they need to feel close to pull away. It's about feeling secure and loved in the relationship. And then they can have their own interests and independence.
It's about finding that sweet spot between togetherness and autonomy and understanding that both are super important for a healthier relationship.
So we've covered a lot of ground. Love languages, communication styles, that need for space. But there's this one last piece that I think is crucial to really grasping that whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus perspective.
You mean the influence of our past, all those old wounds and emotional baggage that we bring into our relationships, and that's what we'll explore next.
Welcome back to Classic Books Deep Dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and it's been quite the trip through the world of relationships.
We've covered so much ground, from those communication differences to those love languages. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is. But as we've been saying, it's not just about understanding our partner's Martian or Venusian side, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's also all that baggage we bring in from our own past.
Exactly. And that's where Gray introduces this idea called the 90-10 principle. He says 90% of how we react in our relationships, especially those heated moments, comes from old hurts. Patterns we've developed over time. Only 10% is actually about what's happening right now.
So it's like we're lugging around these backpacks filled with past experiences, and sometimes they get bumped and all that stuff spills out.
Right, and it can make these little disagreements blow up because we're not just reacting to the situation, we're reacting to a whole history of hurt and disappointment.
That makes so much sense. But how do we even begin to unpack those backpacks? How do we deal with that 90% that's not even about our partner?
Well, Gray talks about becoming a love archaeologist. It's about really digging deep and understanding those old wounds, those patterns of behavior, those emotional triggers that get in the way of connecting with our partners.
It's like we need to do some inner excavating before we can lay down a solid foundation for a healthy relationship.
Exactly. And it's not about placing blame on our parents or getting stuck in the past. It's about recognizing how those experiences have shaped us, the good and the bad, and taking responsibility for our own reactions.
You know, there's this quote from the book that I really liked. True love is a process of healing our wounds together. It's not about finding someone who's perfectly healed. It's about being willing to support each other's growth.
Right. And sometimes that means having those hard conversations, setting boundaries, learning to communicate our needs in a way that's strong but also kind. It's not always easy, but it's so worth it.
Because in the end, it's about building a relationship that's based on trust and respect. A deep understanding of each other's inner worlds.
It's about seeing past those surface differences, those Martian and Venusian quirks, and connecting at a much deeper level.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So as we finish up our deep dive into men are from Mars, women are from Venus, what's one final thought you'd like to leave our listener with?
I think it's this. Even though this book was written a while back, that message about understanding and respecting the differences between men and women in relationships is still so relevant today.
It's a good reminder that we all come to relationships with different needs and viewpoints. And those differences, while they can sometimes lead to conflict, they can also help us learn and grow.
So keep those conversations going. Keep learning about each other. Keep exploring those Martian and Venusian sides within yourselves and your partners. And most importantly, keep choosing love, even when it's hard.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Classic Books Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time as we explore another book that's helped us understand ourselves and the world around us.